They weren't animals, but they were put in cages. They weren't actors, but they were forced to perform. And they weren't criminals, but the world paid to watch them suffer. This isn't ancient history. This happened in the age of cameras, in the age of press, in the age of applause, and not in one country, but across continents. From the late 1800s through the early 20th century, a global phenomenon unfolded, quietly at first, then with spectacular flair. It was called many things: living anthropology, ethnographic exhibitions, colonial showcases. But the public called them something simpler: human zoos. Men, women, children, from colonized lands, put on display, in cages, in mock villages, to be studied, photographed, laughed at, gawked at. They were taken from Africa, Southeast Asia, Oceania, South America, even indigenous North America. While the Eiffel Tower was stealing hearts above the skyline, another spectacle was drawing crowds below: the Negro village. Here, over 400 Africans, Senegalese, Congolese, and Malagasys, were put in a fenced enclosure to simulate tribal life. They wore what curators deemed native attire. They were told to build huts, cook food, dance, hunt, barefoot, degraded, controlled. Posters called it civilization on display. Visitors called it thrilling. Newspapers called it a triumph of anthropology. Among those exhibited was a Senegalese man named Mamadou, a fisherman from the coast who was promised work in France. He never saw his children again. Even before 1889, France had experimented with live displays. The Jardin d'acclimatation in Paris, originally built for exotic animals, started adding humans in 1877. In one 1877 program, 2 Inuit families were displayed beside polar bears. In 1881, Nubians and Bushmen were kept inside enclosures, fed at scheduled times, and subjected to thousands of daily stares. One pamphlet advertised, "Come see the faces of the world, wild, untouched, before they are lost to civilization." This was France's grandest statement of empire. Over 33 million visitors attended. It featured 26 native villages, from Indochina, Madagascar, North Africa, and more. Villagers were imported, some voluntarily, most under coercion. Among the highlights, Vietnamese women weaving silk in front of gawking guests. Algerian children performing recited French colonial pledges. A group of Kanaks, from New Caledonia, forced to reenact tribal conflict for crowds. A Congolese man named Mvunga publicly refused to chant on cue. He was fined and isolated. These were not cultural exchanges. They were carefully controlled theater, designed to justify empire. Postcards were sold. Postcards showing smiling natives in happy huts. But behind the huts were locked doors. And behind the smiles were contracts they couldn't read. This is what French newspapers said at the time. Le Petit Journal wrote, "The native shows are not just entertainment. They are a lesson in France's civilizing mission." Le Matin wrote, "Children love the primitive drums of the African compound. It is education wrapped in play." The applause never stopped, not in the crowd, not in the press, not in the polished rooms of colonial government. Germany perfected the Volkerschau, or people shows. Karl Hagenbeck's 1874 Samoan and Nubian caravan show toured Hamburg, Berlin, and Vienna. These were not invitations. They were contracts masked as adventure. Subjects danced, cooked, simulated tribal battles, all choreographed. In 1885, Berlin Zoo hosted Nubians beside elephants. 3 died from cold exposure. Anthropologists treated them as specimens, measuring skulls, timing movements, cataloging facial structure. Dahomey women warriors were brought from Africa to simulate tribal warfare in 1896 Hamburg. Behind the spectacle, a widow, a mother, a seamstress. King Leopold II hosted a Congolese village exhibit in Tervuren. 267 Congolese were brought to simulate tribal life. 7 died of cold, infection, and starvation. 1 man, Ngoma, collapsed mid-demonstration. No burials, no names remembered. This wasn't display, it was death by neglect, cloaked in pageantry. Belgium's colonial propaganda was exported as pageant. The applause drowned the mourning. Over 1,100 Filipinos were shipped to Missouri. Igorots, Negritos, Moros, and others. They performed daily rituals, including staged dog-eating, sword dances, and faux schooling under American supervision. One Igorot child, Antero, died from pneumonia. His coffin became part of the photo exhibit. The press called it educational. There was no ceremony. In 1906, Oda Benga, a Congolese man, was placed in a cage with orangutans at the Bronx Zoo. After public outcry and eventual release, he later took his own life. In the late 1800s, Dutch officials staged Javanese villages at exhibits across Amsterdam and The Hague. The 1883 International Colonial and Export Exhibition hosted The Living East Indies. Women wove batik, men performed gamelan music on command. Many were contract workers coerced through colonial offices in Batavia. They didn't speak Dutch. Their earnings were withheld until they returned. A woman named Shri, age 16, collapsed mid-demonstration from exhaustion. No interpreter, no aid. Britain's 1911 Festival of Empire in London recreated colonial scenes with live performers. Aboriginal Australians, West Africans, and Indians were displayed in period-accurate environments at the Crystal Palace. Colonial soldiers were made to parade in daily shows. Audiences included the royal family. In 1851, even the Great Exhibition at the Crystal Palace included savage relics and primitive attire. Unlike other nations, Britain's human zoos were often marketed as military showcases. But behind the marching boots were unpaid, unfree men. In 1887 Naples and 1888 Barcelona, Italian and Spanish World Fairs displayed Eritreans, Somalis, and Filipinos. These exhibits often ran alongside missionary displays showing before and after conversion. In Spain, Filipino Igorots were asked to simulate headhunting rituals. Priests gave tours, describing their Christian progress. A Spanish pamphlet from 1889 read, "From jungle beasts to brothers in Christ, witness the miracle." During the 1903 Osaka Expo and later in 1910 and 1913, Japan displayed Ainu villagers from Hokkaido and Korean performers as examples of the civilizing role of the empire. Ainu were dressed in furs and asked to simulate bear hunts. Korean villagers demonstrated bowing rituals and calligraphy. Both were instructed to remain silent unless spoken to. Most fairgoers laughed, some wept, but almost none protested. In France, children threw coins at Congolese performers to make them dance. In the US, souvenir postcards of Igorots sold out daily. In Germany, audiences debated whether Nubians should be fed raw meat to stay authentic. Not all were blind. A few voices emerged, muted, ignored. In 1906, a black pastor in New York, Reverend James H. Gordon, called the Oda Benga display a disgrace to civilization. His protest made the papers and was forgotten within days. Many names are lost, but a few wrote letters, kept journals, spoke to reporters. Angelina, a 13-year-old Filipina, wrote in 1904, "We sleep behind walls like goats. The crowd spits when we do not smile." Mvunga, a Congolese farmer, recalled in 1933, "They asked us to pretend we worshipped bones. I told them, I worship maize. They laughed." Oda Benga, before his death, left behind a note. "I am done being watched. I was never free." These are not just stories. They are witnesses. Today, many museums remain silent, but some have begun to act. The Royal Museum for Central Africa in Belgium now includes an apology wall and Congo exhibit retelling the truth. France's Musée du Quai Branly hosted a controversial 2011 exhibition on human zoos that sparked national debate. In the US, the Missouri Historical Society acknowledged the dark legacy of the 1904 fair. But most victims remain nameless. Most records incomplete. Most governments have never apologized. What was lost wasn't just dignity. It was trust. Generations grew up believing they were less, that their ancestors were curiosities. And what was gained? Photos, postcards, stereotypes, and a silence that still echoes. They were caged, across continents, while the world applauded.